Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to express sincere thanks to all of our wonderful guests who shared their time with me in Season 5. I'd also like to thank, importantly, all of you, our listeners now spanning right across the globe in more than 60 countries. A huge thanks also for all the really positive feedback, and I want to share some of that with you. Simon Ward, best podcast for leaders in a growing company. Each episode is packed with useful, relevant insights, 50 minutes of gripping content that you can put into practical use. Couldn't recommend this podcast enough. Thank you, Simon. Fantastic listen, brilliant and very easy listen. Fantastic stuff all around. So many practical insights. I absolutely love this podcast, such a wide array of topics and contributors, but most deliver the same strand of key messages couched in a range of examples and industries, making them easy to relate to and understand. So many practical tips, as well as thoughtful insights that leave you pondering. These podcasts have helped me greatly to be a better leader and shape a more inspiring future for myself and our teams. And a quick request to everyone listening, if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please take a moment and click the plus button if you're listening to Apple Podcasts. And it would really help the show if you could take 60 seconds and provide a short review. This is content that we produce ourselves at our own cost. There's a huge value in terms of the contribution from all of our guests. With my finance hat on, I've estimated that it's somewhere between 300 and 500,000 pounds if you were to engage these guests in keynotes. So please, please, please leave a review. It will really, really help the show. Now, without further ado, Claire, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for having me back.
Can you believe how quickly the last 10 weeks has gone?
It has flown by, absolutely flown.
Are you having a nice summer so far?
Yeah, the summer has been great. Maybe a couple more days of that lovely bright sunshine we had a month ago would be great. But otherwise, it's great. Thanks for asking.
You're looking great and certainly brightened by the sunshine. So tell me, did you enjoy Season 5?
Season 5 was another outstanding season. I have to say, first and foremost, the biggest highlight for me was the fact that you interviewed my all-time favourite speaker, author and entrepreneur in Dr. Margaret Heffernan. And I was listening to you interview her feeling a little bit starstruck, but it made me, first time I ever came across Margaret Heffernan was back in 2016. And she delivered the most mind-blowing keynote speech at one of the annual CIPD conferences down in Manchester. And then the next time I heard her on the stage was with you, whenever we travelled over to London and we heard her talk. And I love her message, and it really resonates with me. And, you know, she talks about the things that most successful businesses have. Oodles of it is helpfulness, and how helpfulness consistently outperforms intelligence within business. And you know, I love the analogy she uses with the bricks and the mortar, and that we focus typically on the bricks as in the people, and quite often we tend to forget about the mortar, which is the relationships and what happens between people. But it's actually the mortar provides the strength in the building, the strength in the business, and that's the bit that really matters the most. So it was amazing to hear you interview her, and that was brilliant. So I was so happy that she was on the show, and it was a brilliant episode.
Well, I'm going to get into some of the reflections, but I just want to pick up on that. I know you're a huge fan of Margaret, as I am, and I made an appeal right at the outset of the show for people to leave a comment on Apple Podcasts to help the reach of the podcast. We're now spanning more than 60 countries. I feel passionately about the value that our guests are contributing. In terms of Margaret, and this is fairly typical, people will pose to me, how do you get your guests? It took me 9 months of appealing to Margaret to come on to the show.
Wow.
Claire, lots of no's initially, but for you and for the guests, I persisted. And this is often the case to bring world-class contributors onto the show. And I feel strongly that if you've listened to the show, if you have received value from our guests, which I've no doubt that you have, then please, please, please share it with your network and leave a review. So there's my appeal over, but I delighted that we got Margaret onto the show, and she was a phenomenal guest. But we're going to get into that. So in terms of, it's a nice segue into the reflections from season 5.
I think another fascinating episode that I really enjoyed was the scientific perspective of Dr. Mithu Storoni. And I'm not sure whether I can say this in terms of calling her a sexy scientist, but I could have listened to her voice all day long. It was a great episode. It was fascinating, delivered brilliantly, but she provided a great lesson into the science behind, what happens to us whenever we go for a walk in nature, or whether we meditate, or whether we expose ourselves to the cold. So I love the science around how we activate our parasympathetic nervous system, and actually how that all relates to the day to day, and the science behind what that actually does for us whenever we're facing fear. But I'll talk a little bit about facing fear later on. But I loved that. And then I think it's fair to say that Oren Claff came as a thunderbolt and really woke me up. He came full force. I really just enjoyed the discussion. He talked about, I found that really fascinating, because he talked about how we frame things and actually encouraged us to reframe it in order to move towards a more balanced relationship of power, the 50-50 relationships. And it actually really resonated with me as well. And I think, this was a number of years ago, somebody pointed out to me my tendency to apologize a lot. And I think, I'm not sure whether it's a female thing, but I think a lot of us do. And she gave me a brilliant little tip. And it was, instead of opening your email, for example, with sorry for the delay, she had just a slight little change and talk about, just say thank you for your patience. And it's the same thing. And Oren talked about, if we're standing up, we're in a boardroom, or we're giving a pitch, or we're going for an interview, and we stand up and we ask people, just stop me throughout the presentation if you have any questions to ask. The little signals that sends in terms of, actually, we don't really have full trust in our presentation that we're about to deliver. So I love that. I found that really useful and really fascinating. And I think there's an awful lot that we can learn by adapting our language slightly, just to enable us to have that stronger footing whenever we go in, either to negotiate or to build more stronger relationships.
Yeah, something Oren mentioned, just to add to that, is we always politely say, or certainly typically we politely say, a thank you for your time, which automatically says that your time is worth less than the person that you're pitching to's time. Why would your time be any less than the other person? So back to gaining this 50-50 relationship when you're actually seeking to connect the person to your product or service. Ultimately, you're there to connect them to it. You're confident of the value that you bring, and you want to create that 50-50 relationship. So by thanking people, which we instinctively do, certainly in this side of the world, for their time, you're automatically suggesting that their time in some way is more valuable than yours.
Completely. He's doing some great work for entrepreneurs who are going out there to give their pitch to investors, and all of a sudden, automatically, I think we just feel that we're on a slightly less footing, or than an investor who's short of time. But these entrepreneurs are creating wonderful things. They've got wonderful ideas. They've got no more time, to do this than an investor. So I love what he's doing. I love the purpose behind what he is setting out to do. But all in, the season was full of great insights as ever. I think there was some new themes coming through, which I'll look forward to talking to you about. But I really just enjoyed your discussions. So brilliant season. Well done again.
Oh, thank you so much. Any other reflections before? You've kindly mentioned the emerging themes, and I'm really curious, because you always come to this from a different perspective than me, and I love that. And I'm always curious when we come to this wrap up to hear what has emerged for you in relation to the themes. Any other reflections before we move on to the themes?
I don't think so, but it's a really interesting point you made because we often people talk to us about the episodes and we have discussions about the episodes off air, and it's really interesting because other people pick up stuff that I wouldn't pick up, and you pick things up that I wouldn't pick up. So it's lovely to get an opportunity to discuss, your reflections with other people.
Yeah, and it's interesting going back to your point about Dr. Mitu Staroni, and there couldn't have been more opposite guests. And again, this gives people a flavor of the variety of guests that we have on the show who all speak to one or more of the 10 principles of our ScaleX framework. Mitu and Oren couldn't be more opposite, but I was running with a CEO shortly after that episode, and before we got out of the car, and immediately he said to me, he said, "Thank you so much for that episode." He said, "I suffered with that condition in my eye years ago after a flight to England. It was a period of high stress for him, and he didn't realize what it was. He went to see a specialist. They suggested something else, and he realized after the episode with Dr. Mitu, who described the condition when we're suffering high stress. And I'm trying to reflect back now exactly what that was, but some little spack on the eye, some little blockage on the eye. And he discovered then after listening to the episode exactly what it was. So
Yeah, I mean, she's absolutely fascinating, and clearly a real depth of knowledge there. And I got so much from that episode myself. So there we go.
great.
We'll all be self-diagnosing ourselves after that.
Stay away from Google, Dr. Google.
That's it.
So, Claire, on to the emerging themes. What came up for you?
Well, probably, in fairness, probably less themes. So, in terms of themes, what I'm looking for is the consistent strands across all of the podcasts, all 10, and probably less, but a lot deeper. So, I felt that the first one that really struck me, and it was really present across so many different episodes, was around psyche and the mindset, in particular, our ability to face our fears. And Qureshi, he talked about it whenever he talked about into the future. There'll be two types of companies, either the brave ones or the dead ones. Aidan McCullen, he talked about the importance of having bravery to make that jump. Mike Michalowicz, which I now go to call him Mike Motorbike, but Mike Michalowicz, he talks about fear in marketing, and quite often it's the greatest barrier of effective marketing because we have that fear that we don't really want to put ourselves forward as being different to capture people's attention. So that was a real theme that was coming through. Jamil then reminded us that if we want to create bigger and better outcomes, we need to challenge our current belief system. And it actually took me back to, I think it was season 2, where you interviewed Chris Yonker. And a lovely phrase he used, and I know we kind of often refer to that as doubt your doubts. So that coupled with, again, Dr. Mitu Staroni, who, again, really reinforced the point whenever we are operating at a more senior level and we are looking at our business and projecting into the future, quite often it can invoke more fear and a greater sense of fear. And I love the fact then that she was given good practical techniques around, how to activate and why it's important. You see a lot of people going in to dip themselves in fresh water or a lot of people talking about the goodness that they feel whenever they're walking in nature. And it's more than how we feel. It's more about what it does whenever we come out. There's actual chemical changes in there that help us to cope better with our fear, that which again, as a business leader, is really important whenever we're making critical decisions. So again, she went into all of that in her episode, which I loved. And if we're making really important decisions for our business, based on a point in time whenever we're full of fear, it really could be quite catastrophic. So
Yeah, and just to add to that, Sharon Lecter, who closed the season, mentioned what she does to overcome fear. And we talk about choosing or having faith in terms of
Yes,
leaning
that's
into her
right.
vision. She said, rather than have faith, move forward with faith.
I love
And I
that.
truly believe when you're well intended in terms of having a purpose that seeks to serve others, solve a problem or service a need in Sharon's language, and you have crafted a vision that is the fullest expression of that purpose at the point in time in which you've crafted that vision, then you should move forward with faith and trust that the answers will present themselves, the people, places, projects that you need and want certainty of at the time in which you're crafting your vision will present when you need to know the answer. And a big part of what we do within the ScaleX Accelerator program, of course, is provide a degree of certainty in terms of the stepping stones to move, to reverse engineer from your vision to the present day, you know, bringing your vision into the present day. And something that when we piece this together, and why I dig so deeply into psyche is to really get under the bonnet of the what's holding people back. As you and I both know, lack of ambition is cited as the single greatest impediment as to why CEOs don't scale. Now, we know it's not lack of ambition. There's a level of resistance or fear, call it what you wish, but it's something that's preventing people from moving forward. And Jamil referred to, and this is a guy who has coached 5 of the world #1 golfers over the last 10 years. And this has stuck with me, he suggested that consistency of thought is the single greatest determinant of success. And that's consistency of thought aligned to a vision which you have crafted. So if negative thoughts enter your head, will become aware of them, recognize them, but quickly swap them out for a thought that serves your vision. So
That's great. Sorry, great advice there in terms of what you're talking about. And I think half the battle is actually recognizing it as an emotion that we are feeling fearful. And I loved you talked about Sharon using, you know, the leap of faith and switching that round to leap with faith. She also talked about turning your fear into energy and excitement, and think of it as an opportunity to do something new. So whenever you're feeling that fear and being out of your comfort zone, that's when, you know, we often read about that's when we're learning, but that's when we're doing something new, we're growing, we're
yeah,
experiencing new things.
it's cliched, but the saying growth exists on the other side of fear. Essentially, if you read fear as being resistance, you will not grow until you feel that resistance and move beyond it. And I often cite the example or use the metaphor of the lobster, which only can shed its shell and grow into a bigger shell whenever actually it starts to feel the pressure from its skin to the existing shell. And whenever that pressure comes to bear, then the existing shell breaks and it goes and hides and grows a new shell, which is bigger, which it then grows into again. And until they feel that resistance, they'll never form a bigger shell. And again, we're very deliberate as to why psyche is the first principle of our ScaleX accelerator or ScaleX framework, because ultimately you will never scale beyond the framework of your own belief system, your own thought patterns, your own identity, call it what you wish. So ultimately, we've got to work on that first. And I believe a lot of the guests in this season have really spoken to that.
They absolutely did. And I love that you brought it back to the scaling environment, because, you know, the whole concept of exponential growth will always mean that you don't have all the answers and you don't know what's coming around the corner. And it's learning to be okay with that. And it's learning to recognize that this is how it's going to feel. So I
Yeah.
love that. It was common throughout most of the episodes. Another theme that came through loud and clear for me, it was all kicked off with Aidan McCullen at the very beginning, was innovation and experimentation and the importance of taking risks and making mistakes and creating that safe environment where people feel able to speak up and then learn from them. And he kicked off with a story, and this really amazed me. And it was whenever Amazon were developing their was it Fire Phone, and how was a huge flop, and probably due to the level of competition that was coming through from Apple and so on. But they were able to salvage the learnings from the Fire Phone, and this was the voice control, and then put it into the smart speaker, the Amazon smart speaker, and then which is what we commonly know as Alexa, and actually is present in over 50 houses, 50 homes across the United States. So that was absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah, Aidan refers to harvesting the assets from the ashes, which I love.
That's really brilliant. And you know what? I think a lot of that boils down to, he referred to another example. Was it the CEO of Ford? You know, he mentioned another example, but a lot of it boils down to us speaking openly about what doesn't work, and the leader creating the safe space to enable that to actually happen. So one
That's
thing that
right.
I would urge all of our listeners to go away and think about, how are they creating that safe space within their organizations so that they can have their Alexa moment.
Yeah, yeah, it was Alan Mullally who, whenever he moved into Ford and the
That's
executives of
right.
Ford were losing a lot of money and the executives were presenting dashboards that suggested everything was fine. And he said, well, look, it can't be fine. We're losing millions. And then somebody offered something that wasn't working and he stopped and applauded that.
Yeah,
And once he gave the sign to acknowledge the fact that somebody was being honest and candid rather than presenting what he thought the rest of the board wanted to hear, and certainly what the CEO wanted to hear, then they could really start to craft a solution until they understood the problem, and there was psychological safety around the boardroom to do that. Only at that point could they
exactly.
start crafting solutions.
Exactly. And then Jamil went on, he took that concept and he then started to encourage us to, to play around with our imagination and ask ourselves those questions. I love the power of a great question. And I'm actually going to talk about one of Sharon's great questions, but the questions really get you thinking. And he says, kind of strip away the boundaries. What are the he called it the parameters that are keeping us in place, but take those off and ask the question, what would you spend your marketing budget on if there was no limits? Or what would happen if you gave your product away for free? I love those sorts of questions, and the kind of ideas that would kind of generate from those discussions would be great. There's got to be a
Yeah,
little bit of gold in there.
yeah, absolutely, and something actually was speaking with the CEO yesterday, and they were saying that they couldn't afford something. I can't afford to take on additional resource right now, and they were a little bit stuck. And in Sharon's language and phraseology, I said, rather than come to this with a scarcity mindset that you can't afford it, let's have a conversation about how you might be able to afford it, which immediately changes your mindset. When you shut it
Brilliant.
down, say I can't afford it, you've closed it. When you start to
Yes.
think about, well, how could we afford it, then you start to think about, you know subcontracting in the service that you need temporarily, or we got to a point where we could hire someone at a junior level if we actually cleared 10% of the admin work of some of the senior team, and that would free up the capacity of another person at a senior level, but bring somebody in at a junior level, just by having a conversation, moving from the we can't to how could we.
Yeah, all of a sudden you're attempting something to find a solution.
Your energy changes.
Yeah, it really does. And I think everybody, well, most people are very solution focused. They want to find the answer to figuring out how we can make it happen,
Yeah, yeah,
as opposed to closing it down. I loved also Sharice Nadkarni. I thought it was a really interesting way to look at it, and probably something I don't hear too much, but probably not being as close to the world of technology. But he talked about Duolingo, for example, and Dropbox. They've clearly got millions, maybe even billions of customers, of users of their product, but giving that away for free. but thinking about, how then, he talked about having 3 to 5% of your customer base then starting to pay for your products through a corporate license or through storage. And whenever you've got millions or billions of customers, three to 5% all of a sudden is quite significant. Uh, and that comes with gosh, imagine the fear of you giving your product away for free.
Yeah, the
Uh,
freemium concept.
the free, yes. But secondly, the innovation and the experimentation that was required around that whole thought process, where they said, by the time they got to the point to say yes, there was probably a whole stream of emotions and thinking going on behind that. So, two great examples of what we can do.
Brilliant. So, innovation and experimentation. Any other themes emerging for you?
Yeah, probably the final one, and I wouldn't say it was a theme because it didn't come up in every episode, but I think it's worth highlighting just in terms of where a lot of businesses are now, and it was around Dr. Margaret Heffernan's concept of social capital, and I think it's probably really important, really, to extract this one because whenever so many people are leaving organizations in their droves, it's becoming really more important now than ever. And we really need to give people a sense of meaning in their organizations. We need to focus more on what we can do to build that mortar and that sense of relationships between people. Um, and Equally, we just simply need to make sure that we're reinforcing that people matter. And ultimately, it's those three things that make up social capital. And what I guess a lot of companies are finding now, and maybe the companies that are losing people, are that they don't have that social capital that exists within their organization. So I love, Margaret talked about, she posed the question, what are you doing in your organization to build that mortar, to build those bonds? And it's simple little things like, how are you constructing your lunch arrangements? Many companies are battling with the hybrid working. Are they bringing people back to the office? Are they working from home? Everybody's got a different view on that. I'm finding, what are you doing around social events? And, in my experience, I've shared this with you before, that social events and an investment in social capital goes way beyond throwing money at a social budget. It's getting involved. It's as the CEO, it's getting in there, it's being involved, it's taking part in the activities, it's poking the sausages or flipping the burgers at the company barbecue. It's not just giving them money and letting them go and have a bit of fun. It's so much more than that. It's including people in meetings. It's building diversity into your project teams. Again, I loved Sharice's concept of the two pizza team, but it's all of that contributes to building the social capital within an organization. So I think this is absolutely, it's possibly too late, but sorry, a little late, but this is the right opportunity to look and really evaluate how strong is the border within your organization.
Yeah. So, any other emerging themes from the season, Claire, before I get into any messages that captured your curiosity?
I think those were the three themes that really struck me. I've got a number of key messages, certainly ones that resonated with me and maybe sparked a little bit of curiosity, but those were certainly the three themes. I'm sure other people picked up other themes that I didn't, but maybe in another listen I'd get some more.
So, share some of those messages that came out strong for you.
Well, the first one was around back to Aidan McCullen's interview, and this is I love the terminology he used here, but he talked about a mental amuse bouche, and he said, sometimes when we've got our heads down and we're really busy and we're working hard, it's taking those moments to look up from what we're doing to really appreciate things. And first of all, I was listening to him talk about it, and it actually took me back to an old maths teacher of mine who was probably more affectionately known as Plug at school. And he always used to say, take time to slow down and smell the flowers. But I think as a teenager, that kind of was completely lost on me. But probably later in life, I was in that situation where I had my head down a lot, and I was working in a role where I felt I was spending more time in the air than I was on the ground. And regularly, probably 2, maybe even 3 days a week, I was on the red eye, the 6:15 out of Belfast City Airport, And even before we took off, the laptop was open and my head was down. But one thing I always did was, as we were going above the clouds, I had always made sure to have one of those little mental amuse bushes. And, it was probably dark, usually wet in Northern Ireland, whenever we were taking off. And all of a sudden, you went through the clouds and you had this beautiful big orange sun, with the sun rising above the clouds, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And that was always a moment that I loved, because it was an opportunity to take my head out of my busy schedule and just really appreciate the beauty of life and my surroundings. So, yeah, that was something. I having more of those mental amuse bushes
I love that.
was really important.
If you recall back to, I think it was season 4, when we interviewed Michael Gelb, and Michael is an authority on the principles, the Da Vincian principles. So he has studied and devoted his life to studying the work of Leonardo da Vinci, and Leonardo da Vinci is considered the greatest genius that ever was. 500 years ago, he recognized the importance of getting out into nature, and nature has inspired a lot of the inventions and works of Leonardo da Vinci. And one of the principles, Michael mentioned 7 principles of Leonardo, and one of those principles is sensazione. And sensazione is that, excuse my Italian, so all the Italians out there
I was going to
listening,
say, I'm getting the impression that you like saying that word.
it's a lovely word, sensazione. And Michael says it with such passion and gusto, and essentially it's exactly what you've just described, the mental amuse bush. In it's stopping metaphorically and literally to smell the roses, taking time to appreciate everything around us, and as opposed to just going into autopilot and through the motions. So yeah, I really
Sometimes,
like that.
if you miss them, they've gone. Isn't that
That's
right?
it.
So another key message that really spoke to me was from Mike Motorbike. I'm going to call him, sorry, Mike McCallowich. I'm going to call you Mike Motorbike. I feel he gave me permission by telling me he set up that website called Mike Motorbike. But I love that he called out the difference between growth and scaling. And I'll refer. He said that growth is achieving more results through more effort, and scaling is achieving more results through less effort. And I know something that, you and I would discuss this quite regularly, but some of the maybe what I would kind of translate as a mistake is, putting, I guess, setting targets for the following year based on what we've achieved this year. The smaller the incremental targets, kind of maybe saying, we've let's add on a couple of 100,000 to our task next year. And actually the psychology behind that sends out a message, and to the teams who are working to deliver these numbers, they're probably working really hard, maybe even close to the point of burnout, and you're squeezing that really hard by actually just adding on small incremental targets. The message that sends to most people is, oh flip, I'm going to have to work even harder next year. I'm feeling exhausted, but I'm going to have to give even more, and I don't know if I've got more to give. Whereas breaking that thought process and actually setting a target around scaling, which as we know is the 20% growth year on year, it actually cuts that off. And the message then goes to people is, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to do something different. And that's whenever you look at automation, you look at implementing technology, you look at how your team's structured, you look at partnerships, you look at all those things, those systemizing your business to enable you to deliver more with less. So I love that Mike called that out in terms of growth and scaling. And
Yeah.
again, we often talk about quite often when businesses are growing and they've got maybe 10 to 15 people and things are starting to become quite strained, it's at that point that people need to realize, I need to do something different, because you can't keep on. You need to transition from the startup to a scale up, and you can't keep going the way you're going.
Yeah, and this is why psyche is so critically important, because what we typically do, and I've been guilty of this in the past, is we look at the last 3 years' performance and we say, well, look, we've grown on average by 8% over the last 3 years. Okay, with a little bit of luck, a little bit of wind in our sails, we might push that to 9 or 10%. And that's plotting the future by looking at the past rather than, again, crafting your vision and reverse engineering your vision. And back to the point that Jamil made about asking good questions. So, that question of, well, what will it take for us to achieve what we've laid out in the vision? What would we change in our processes and systems? How would we leverage the potential within our team differently? What performance metrics would we put in place? What partnerships would we leverage? Is there anything we can do in our proposition to articulate more value to our customer set? Can we expand our customer set? So you just excite within people a different mindset, and it's back to psyche. It's back to the importance of asking good questions, and it's back to reverse engineering from the future to bring the future into the present, as opposed to trying to plot the future from the past.
Yeah, it's if you yes, those messages just again possibly leading to the fact that people are leaving because they're giving everything they've got. Completely
agree. Any other messages, Claire?
Yes, one of my favorite episodes was with Mark Zwig. And I really love that discussion. I'm actually going to read this because he said a quote which I wrote down. I love. He said, "Feeling wealthy comes with how we get to spend our time and who we get to spend it with." And one of the things that certainly that I have tuned into recently is there can often be mixed messages around spending our time. And if I think about the likes of Margaret Heffernan, she promotes that high performing teams are generous with their time. And way back to Kingsley Aiken, you invest your time to build your network. But yet then we've got other people saying be super careful with your time. And, I think Sharon used the term to be stingy with your time. And I get this as well, because once it's gone, you don't get it back. But I can't maybe reflected in those conversations thinking, well, what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do? And I think it's striking that balance. It's being conscious of how you're spending your time is probably the first thing. And it's being sure that how you're spending your time is going to move you forward. But whenever you've committed to giving that time, it's a commitment. It's being there. It's being present. And I think where it can go wrong, or it can become, not, inappropriately used, is whenever somebody is given their time, and we all know them, and they're checking their watches, and they're giving out all these signals that they don't want to be there, or actually their time is more important. If that's the case, don't commit your time to it. But again, that, so I reflected over the whole, do we give our, do we give more of our time, or, should we be really careful with our time? But it's actually having the thought process before you say yes to giving your time. And whenever you do give your time, you commit fully.
Yeah, and I come back to vision driving decision, and we all have the same hours in the day. We get the 24 hours. Again, it's cliched. So we all have the same amount of time. I think of this differently as to where should I channel my energy? And that's slightly different, and that's informed by the vision. So this podcast, the reason we do this podcast, is directed and informed by our vision to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. Now, if our vision was slightly refined and it was scores of SMEs to scale with purpose, well, we wouldn't need to do a podcast. We've set the vision, and it informs the energy then that I direct on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis, like you, Claire, as well. So that's all informed by the vision. And we've spoke about this in the past. We have personal vivid visions as well, leaning on the Cameron Hurled methodology of crafting your vivid vision, and there are 9 or 10 components to that, so, and once you've clarity over that, well, then you can choose to, you're more informed as to where to channel your energy. Yeah, I recall Sharon and what she said, and this, we just picking up on Sharon and the key messages. And this came out from Mike as well. The importance actually of getting over yourself. She said, when I challenged Sharon, in terms of her belief around scaling beyond your existing borders and taking your product or service to the wider world. And we assert that if you have a wonderful product or service, that you have a strong purpose and a great vision, then you should take your product or service to the wider world. When I asked Sharon her opinion on that, she said, absolutely. And she said, for those who don't, shame on you. Don't be stingy. Come on, get it out there. So, and Jim and Mike relayed the same as well. You know, we need to get over ourselves in terms of our marketing efforts and our effort to reach a much wider audience with our product or service.
I think you're right. I recall that, and I think Sharon was probably one of the possibly the few guests to really draw out the importance of protecting your IP. You know,
Yeah,
understanding your IP and working hard to protect that. But then, you know, once you've got that and you've got the right arrangements in place, get it out there.
absolutely.
Yeah, no, love that.
Any other?
One more message I'll share with you. And this is what actually really thought provoking, and I love this. It was from Martin Schilling. And he talks about, he says, puts a different spin on this. He says the company applies to the AAA candidates, not the other way around.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
love that. And I thought that is a really, really good way of looking at it, because gone are the days where, you know, gone are the days where we put out an advertisement and we expect people to apply for it. It does not happen anymore. And, you know, we've got to invest so much of our time in creating a really, an employer brand that's going to help us to stand out, and really sell our company and the future vision of the company and our culture, to potential candidates who are going to join. But yeah, we apply to them as opposed to them applying to us. So that was quite thought provoking, and I love that.
yeah. I love how you frame that as well, and it leaves you approaching the attraction of great talent in a very different way. And we've always said the great people out there are not necessarily looking, because the companies that they're working for have made efforts largely to lock them in. And you've
Absolutely.
got to really put your employer brand out there. You've got to put your vision out there. You've got to be clear on your purpose. You've got to portray or certainly convey a sense of your culture to attract those or excite those passive candidates,
About
to
you.
trigger their curiosity, to explore a little bit further what your company is about. So I completely
Brilliant.
agree on that. And just before we leave, Martin Schilling, I loved his granny test in relation to purpose. I get asked a lot about, you know, how do we go about finding out our why, our purpose, and Martin said it should always, and once you've it crafted, it should always pass the granny test.
I love
And
that.
essentially, you should be able to explain to your granny why you do what you do, and for her to be able to go, yeah, I understand. So
Yeah. I find that at home, not my granny, unfortunately, because she's no longer with us, but my 14-year-old son always probes me with questions around what I'm doing. So it's, I guess the 14-year-old son test is quite similar to the granny test.
brilliant. And I've been reflecting on this, and I got asked this morning again the importance of our own purpose to inspire, connect, and enable ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. And there are more than 400 million SMEs out there, and I feel that given everything that we're doing, if we can move the needle from what is now 1%, certainly in the UK, and that figure, I believe, translates to other countries, if we can move that needle ever so slightly, what we're doing is awakening in leaders a level of consciousness. And once they start developing from the inside out as opposed to from the outside in, that impacts them positively. It impacts their families, their teams, their organization, the wider community, and ultimately they just create a wonderful positive ripple effect when they're committed to scaling with purpose. So,
Absolutely.
and ultimately, we want all of those ripples to eventually join in this wonderful movement of leaders out there scaling with purpose. So,
Here, here.
Claire, in closing, then, I always challenge you to what you're going to do differently as a result of listening to our wonderful guests in season 5.
Great question. And I have to say this one was quite easy for me. And thanks to Sharon Lecter for this great question. But I love the question she poses. And she said, when was the last time you did something for the first time?
Brilliant.
And I reflected on that. I thought it was such a great question. And a number of years back now, whenever I turned 40, I made the commitment to do something that scared me every year. And I think it was on the basis that, one of my greatest fears was watching life go by from the sidelines. Somebody once described that to me, and I thought, oh, no, that's not going to happen to me. So I think I started off by exploring water skiing one year, and great fun. Managed to stay up for a while, but I couldn't lift my arms for the next 2 weeks that followed. I then tackled coasteering up the beautiful north coast of Northern Ireland, and nobody told me that I was going to be tossed around in a pond, having been hit by a 16-foot wave. That was just to start with. So tried that again. Tried a couple of triathlons. You do them. My husband does them. I kind of was curious as to what all the fuss was about. Obviously, starting up your own business, publishing a book brings an element of fear, but did that. And again, the growth that has come through all of that has been absolutely tremendous. But so now is the right time for me to reflect on that, to go away and decide what my next adventure that's going to scare me is going to be. So I just would like to thank Sharon for inspiring me to go away and do that. So the next time we speak, I'll let you know.
Brilliant. So in Sharon's words, you're going to play big.
There you go. Love it. Play
There's
big or
the
go
challenge.
home.
There's the challenge for you. Claire, as I do in all of our wrap-ups, and as I always pose the closing question to our guests, tell us what your favorite 3 timeless takeaways of this season were.
Brilliant. Well, to be honest, I actually found this quite challenging because there were so many great timeless takeaways. But I'm going to focus on Mark Zweig's and Sharon Lecter's. I loved the rawness and the simplicity of Mark Zweig's timeless takeaways. In particular, his first one, be nice to everyone. And actually, ultimately, life is short and we don't know what people are going through. And sometimes that little smile or that little bit of kindness will make all the world of difference. So I love that. It was definitely a big favorite of mine. My second one then was again Mark's. He said, get yourself a great partner, both in business and in life. And I am hugely fortunate to have both of those, you and my business partner and Marty in my personal life. And I feel incredibly wealthy as a result of having a great partner in both of those areas of my life. You make me a better person. And the third of my timeless takeaways, I'm probably going to merge 2 of Sharon's. And she separated asking ourselves, why not? Whenever we're feeling the fear, why not? And the last one she gave was do it anyway. And I'm just going to merge those together and say, why not do it anyway? And just get yourself out there. And as you say, live big. So those are my 3 favorites.
Love them, and you're very kind. The feeling is mutual. I want to thank you as ever for your wonderful smile and your energy and insights today. Again, I love your perspective. It's just presented a different perspective from me in terms of what I picked up from the season whenever I get the opportunity to obviously interview the guests, and I tend to go back and listen to the podcast a number of times. I have my own notes, and there's always some new element of gold in there when you listen. So again, I would encourage the listeners to not only listen to this once, but go back into the season and to the earlier seasons even, and listen again, because the guests that are coming on to the show are delivering huge value. And really, we're now 50 episodes in terms of guest episodes. Brilliant. And we have interviewed some incredible guests who have all provided value for you, guidance for you in relation to your scaling with purpose journey. So, Claire, I look forward to seeing you at the end of season 6, which will be into the end of November, which is just incredible. In the meantime,
My goodness.
have a wonderful end of your summer and a great autumn.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure as always.
Take care.
Bye. Take care.